I was joking with Chris that you have to be over a certain age to know how to work one of these things. Memory card covers.
Oh, the slot has to be down.
Looks good. Oh, it's already showing me.
I just printed it, but I'm
But you're saying.
What's the link?
So because we get to the tail end of the question, it was elemental P, so we start to make the to connect, and then we're changing so you can get right in the front. Thank you. Yes, it's just
This is so exciting. She showed us this last week. Big day. Oh, yeah. Now, did you fix the lighting? Yeah. How was that? What if?
This is just my bag.
Yeah, when I look at it, it's an inconvenience. Chris, I'm always back.
Yeah, I think we'll make this right. Hi, good morning. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming. My name is Sue Michalski. Along with teaching French at Williston, I have the privilege of teaching the Williston Language Scholars course. Working this year with Ava, Sako, and Omar, from whom you will hear shortly. Before you begin, unless you're using it for pictures, please silence your telephones to avoid any audio interference. Following each presentation, we will have time for questions. And if you haven't already, between presentations at the end, please enjoy some of the snacks and coffee that stage has provided for us. Like all Williston Scholars offerings, the Language Scholars course allows students to explore passion. This class, however, is unique. The students enrolled in it do not necessarily share the same language of study. In fact, most often they do not, nor do I, as its instructor, speak all of those languages. In Scholars, language students research a topic in their language of study, while together as a class, we explore language with a capital F. The students' individual research, of course, is rooted in the target language. Informed and inspired by that research, each student then creates something significant in their target language. Today, Ava will speak about the bilingual children's book she wrote and illustrated, Sako about his language podcast inspired from his time in school year abroad, and Omar about the website he made designed to help bilingual Hispanic children tasked with translating for their families in medical situations. These scholars could certainly speak today to us in Spanish or in French, but if they did, they would not understand each other, nor most of us then. So for the final portion of their projects, in the English language that unites us, Ava, Sako, and Omar will share a TED Talk style presentation. What they created, what they learned, the process, and the why behind it all. And we'll be done with Ava.
Okay. For a quick exercise to start, I want everyone to close their eyes and picture something with me. You're around 6 years old, back from a day at kindergarten or first grade. There's no homework, tons of recess. You come home and you have a nice dinner. Now you're all washed up and you're in your pajamas, and it's story time. Out of all the books to choose from, you pick your favorite. Okay, now everyone can open their eyes. What story are you thinking of? Anybody?
Curious George.
Okay, and when you're thinking of Curious George, how did that story make you feel?
He's curious.
You felt
I
curious?
was very curious growing up.
You were curious growing up. Anyone else? A story they read? Hazel?
Pinkalicious.
And what did you love about Pinkalicious?
My dad would read it to me.
So the point I'm making here is that books can unlock memories. What I mean by that is books, especially children's books. They are formative tools that shape us early in life, can remind us of how we used to feel, and can even bring us back to a specific moment of our childhood that we had long forgotten. My name is Ava Howard. I'm an Afro-Latina girl from Westfield, Massachusetts, and more than anything, I love the fact that I'm Puerto Rican. For my scholars project, I wrote and illustrated a children's book called La Receta del Corazón. La Receta del Corazón tells the story of a mother telling her daughter a bedtime story of one of her memories visiting her relatives in Puerto Rico when she was a little girl. Giving her younger self the name La Nena, the mother, Camila, describes the wonderful foods, flavors, and tasks the family worked on together to make a great feast to her daughter, Sofia. With the help of her mother, her abuelos, her brother, and two tios, La Nena and her family have a wonderful day together, bonding through the shared connection of language and cuisine. Sofia is left astounded by her mother's past, asks her mother to make a traditional Puerto Rican dish for dinner, and bonding through the shared connection, she leaves Camila proud that she could share her family's cultural pride with her little girl. La Receta del Corazón is meant for ages 6 to 8, and it combines my Spanish and English script with my hand-drawn illustrations. While their names are different, most of the characters in the story are based on my real family. For example, Camila and La Nena, Camila's younger self in the bedtime story, are based on my mom, my teeny little girl in the middle on the left. My bisabuela, my great-grandmother, was also used in creating La Nena's abuela. Additionally, La Nena's mother and brother are my real-life abuela and tio. What about the two tios in my story, you might ask? Those are from my imagination. I just like the idea of twin uncles with funny mustaches. Before I had my story, I envisioned my story's images. I hand-drew all of the illustrations on a storyboard in my sketchbook, and then I transferred them to a digital painting app called Procreate. Once put in Procreate, I took each panel and rendered it into a finished piece. The main setting is in a modern cartoon style inspired by the graphic novels of Raina Telgemeier I used to read religiously as a kid. And the story's flashback illustrations draw inspiration from other series I once read, including Dark Diaries by Rachel Renee Russell and Dog Man by Dave Pilkey. I wrote La Receta del Corazón in Spanish and translated it into English. When it came to assembling the book, I printed it side by side in English and Spanish, combined it with my images, and bound it together with alternating text on one side and images on the other. I wrote my Spanish script before my English script, and I separated the illustrations to make them further enhance the story. During my research, I learned from the Multilingual Resources for Children project that the design of a bilingual book and its text alignment for each language determines that book's primary language. Because books typically read left to right, I put the Spanish text on the left and the English on the right to determine Spanish as my book's dominant language. Out of all the ways I could convey Spanish and its importance to me, why in the form of a kid's book? I made La Receta del Corazón for the little girl I once was, who hadn't yet developed an awareness of the complexity in her identity. My mother's side of the family originates from San Lorenzo, a town in the mountains of Puerto Rico. My life at home has always felt rich with multicultural moments that I treasure. I remember as a girl having to sit impatiently while my mom picked pelusa or dust out of my hair from the bedroom carpet, and waking up every Sunday to the sound of my mom cleaning downstairs, while Flor Bonita by Costa Brava echoed throughout the house. My mother and I created a special bond that way. We could communicate with each other in both English and Spanish. But as I've gotten older, there became a stronger emphasis on solely speaking English in the house, while leaving Spanish to be the language I could master through my academics. This led to a link between my mother and I weakening, and I felt insecure about my fluency and how it tied to the value of my identity in a way that I didn't think about when I was younger. When I first started my Language Scholars project in the fall, I wondered if other kids questioned their identity in the same way. I thought, surely I can't be the only kid coming from a multicultural household split between English and Spanish, right? In fact, as of 2022, 32% of children under the age of 9 are dual language learners, or DLLs for short. As defined by the Migration Policy Institute, a dual language learner is a child with a parent that speaks a language other than English, and due to that linguistic exposure, could develop to be multilingual. That's when the idea of creating a children's book came to me. In La Receta del Corazon, I highlighted themes of familial togetherness and pride in my culture, and I wanted those to be understandable for young readers. When I was a little girl, I didn't have books about Puerto Rico or any books showcasing displays of distinctly Puerto Rican traditions. I wrote La Receta del Corazon to show appreciation for the other children and families like my own through a story that comes from my mother's lived experience and the value that I put on our Puerto Rican culture. Additionally, I made my book to introduce readers that don't come from a background like mine to the way that my relatives in Puerto Rico bonded with each other, and that's through lots of food. I wanted to showcase authentically Puerto Rican meals that people may not have heard of before, such as verduras con bacalao, morcillas, and lechon. What did my project initially look like? At first, my project was going to be an anthology series of 3 illustrated children's books with my abuela, my mother, and myself as the main characters, retelling each character's typical day at school and at home using the slang of her era. After a few weeks of researching Puerto Rican slang, I soon realized that most current slang used is the same as 50 to 60 years ago. I was left having to find a new way to make these books work. Then, Ms. Michalski suggested, why don't you make one book with all 3 characters intertwined? It made sense to me. I could keep the matriarchal connection all in one book. From there, I took my abuela, my mother, and myself and put all of us into a new storyline where a character inspired by my mother would tell her daughter a bedtime story based on her past in San Lorenzo with her relatives when she was the daughter's age. Creating a plot connecting my childhood with my mother's felt more personal. The question then became, what family story would I tell? I wanted La Receta del Corazon's plot to be as authentic as possible, but it would be set before my birth with realistic Puerto Rican dishes, family members, and dialogue. To get some inspiration, I decided to interview my mom. I was excited to dig up all unheard evidence of my family's rich past, ready to jot down anything. I wanted to know how my mom dressed to the way the inside of her abuela's house looked like. During our conversation, though, my mom couldn't remember much. Becoming frustrated, I was once again motivated by Ms. Michalski to look at my project from a different angle. She suggested that I spend time reading children's books, so I took my mom with me to Barnes & Noble. Over the long weekend, I spent an evening with my mom in the Barnes & Noble's cafe, a pile of children's books in Spanish and English between us. That's when the floodgates opened. Sitting down, reading all kinds of stories with many different themes with my mother, I watched these books unlock something in her that she hadn't remembered before we got there. I could hear her reacting next to me with these little gasps, mumbling to herself about names in the story that were the same as her relatives, and the close-knit family dynamics in the stories bringing her back to her childhood in Puerto Rico. Immediately, my mom told me many valuable experiences from her childhood, and I rushed to write down everything she remembered before the memories faded away again. Just like that, I watched these little children's books in Spanish, made for an audience much younger than all of us here, let my mom relive her past for a moment. Her eyes glimmered with that pure happiness and excitement that only kids have, like she was that little version of herself from the 70s sitting in that chair. Using that incredible experience I had over the long weekend, I came back to my project and officially reworked it into the book that I have now, La Receta del Corazon. To me, language is a way of communicating your emotions, wants, and needs to the people in your life. I convey these things in both English and Spanish with my mother. She's the only person that I speak Spanish with outside of school. The process of writing my book connected me to my mother, my abuela, my bisabuela, and our shared language of Spanish. I made this book because I'm proud of my culture. I'm proud of the nights I come home to pollo y arroz con habichuelas for dinner. I'm proud of the broken Spanish I speak with my mom. And most importantly, I'm proud to be Puerto Rican. My Spanish is not yet as good as my abuela's, but my project reminded me that my level of fluency does not diminish my love for my Puerto Rican roots. My language, my family, my traditions, and my island. These facets of my identity are the ingredients in my recipe, the recipe of the heart.
Now we have some time for some questions. If anyone has any, you've kind of hit on so much, but any questions about the process, the book, which we'll be here for you to look at after as well.
First of all, excellent presentation.
Thank you so much.
My wife works a lot with dual language learners and tries to find a lot of books where kids can see themselves in the book. So my question for you is, when you did this, you described about balancing between your personal experiences and honoring Puerto Rican culture. As you look through the different books in Barnes & Noble with your mom and in the research that you did, what are some things that you took away from it that you didn't know before about the value and the importance of having diversity in children's books in general?
I think that when you're a kid, you may not have a full concept of like where you come from and what your identity is from both sides of your family. But a kid can notice if they don't see someone that looks like them in a book. I think that looking at the books I read in Barnes & Noble, there were books that mainly had English as the dominant language and Spanish as not an afterthought, but the language that you would read if you knew Spanish or if you were trying to learn it. I wanted to flip that around and make Spanish the first thing a kid saw. I wanted a kid that looked like me or might look like another multicultural kid that wants to pick up a book and see themselves in that book.
I have a second question too, or a suggestion. I would encourage you to continue with this. You know, one time a UMass professor that said, a project is never done. So I'm thinking even beyond this, to reach out to some Puerto Rican children's authors and literally contact them and say, can I share my story with you? And get their feedback on it. And I think that would be a really, really rich dialogue for you to have, make some island connections, and for them to see someone in the States creating something that they themselves created on the island. So just a suggestion, a little bit of research there, but I think it would be a really nice next step for us.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Thank you so much, Ava.
Oh.
Yes.
Sorry.
Hi.
This is beautiful, and the story is really striking. And the family history tied in with the illustrations is what's particularly capturing my attention. So I was curious about how that worked, right? So this is a project focused on language. How did art kind of influence this project, and how did you balance the Spanish piece with these beautiful illustrations that clearly look like they took so much time?
I think that because I've been working with art since I had the tools in front of me to do so, it wasn't as big as a challenge as it might have been for someone who wouldn't typically tackle art. I thought it would be interesting to make something for my younger self with the abilities that I have now that I didn't have back then. And even before I started the process of writing and drafting a script, I already knew how I wanted the book to look. You know what I mean? It's like that image that I always have of the way I want my art to be. The real challenge is just trying to translate it from my brain onto a physical piece. I think that's where the balance came in of you can make the images first and then you can create the story around those images. You can go either way, but to me, because I have a pretty artistic mindset, I thought that it would be more enriching to put my thoughts out there through art first and then go back with a equally eloquent script second.
So we will have time at the end for questions for all three presenters, but we're going to stop now so we have enough time so all three. Yes. All right, and next we have Sako.
You walk out of an airplane and you are told that you arrive in Paris. The customs official switches to English after hearing you say bonjour, but you're a master of airports, so no sweat. The real shock, however, is when you leave the city of love. You arrive in Rennes, and your fear of understanding nothing is realized. Almost everything being said around you flies over your head, and you fear that you will never be able to understand French people. Although I took French for 4 years before going abroad, this is exactly how I felt on my first day in Rennes. Hello everyone, my name is Sako Lively. I'm a senior at Williston, and I'm an alumnus of School Year Abroad, France 2024. I'm a native English speaker, and I improved my French from studying abroad during my junior year of high school. This is a picture of me at 16 years old when I visited Mont Saint-Michel during my first weeks in France. It was the very beginning of my time abroad, and I often made mistakes in French. Today, I will be telling you about Faux Pas Français, my French podcast. Each episode is an interview in French that explores the blunders and breakthroughs of speaking French abroad, or languages abroad. The title, Faux Pas Français, loosely translates to French missteps, alluding to the linguistic mistakes I discuss in each of my interviews. What was my inspiration to create Faux Pas Français? In France, I often talked about with my best friend Joey Flower, seen here in the picture, about the linguistic mistakes we'd made in French and just the language in general. I created Faux Pas Français to emulate the joy that I derived from these conversations. My podcast is also designed to reassure future exchange students, specifically those who study French, that speaking foreign languages abroad has low stakes but very high rewards. I decided to produce a podcast because its audio format reflects the conversations that I wanted to represent. Also, podcasts are incredibly popular and can reach a global audience. Nearly 50% of all Americans are monthly podcast listeners, and there are more than 550 million podcast listeners worldwide. Next, I researched different types of podcasts. I chose the interview format for mine because I like the engaging audio and storytelling aspects of interviews. I also researched how to create interview questions, the steps to record, and the steps to podcast a podcast. Then, I determined my interviewees. At first, I just wanted to interview people who had lived abroad, such as my friend Joey, who had studied with me in France. I also decided to interview my host brother, Antonin Larnaval, who is currently on the left right there. He's currently also studying abroad in Kansas. And after noticing their similarities, I decided to structure my podcast around mirroring experiences like Joey's and Antonin's to emphasize how linguistic struggles and successes are universal. I also interviewed 2 French teachers, Adeline Brown-Panagos and Marie-Josée Marquis. Madame Marquis grew up speaking French in Quebec and has lived abroad in Mexico and the United States. Similarly, Ms. Brown-Panagos has lived abroad in different countries. However, she is a native English speaker. These 2 teachers contributed to my theme of mirroring experiences while offering the adult perspective on living abroad. I also created a list of questions in French to learn about my interviewees' experiences with foreign languages. I designed many of them to be open-ended to encourage storytelling, and I edited each interview from roughly 30 minutes to 10 minutes of focused content. I catered to listeners with a level 2 French fluency by using simple grammar structures, basic vocabulary, and several cognates in my interview questions, like the one up there. Here's a question from my interview with Madame Brown-Panagos.
Vous avez eu une histoire dans laquelle vous vous êtes linguistiquement trompé?
The question asks her to share a story of a time she made a linguistic faux pas. She then talks about the Spanish false cognate embarazada, which means pregnant, not embarrassed as she had initially thought. The story fits in with the main theme of Faux Pas Français, linguistic mistakes. In my interview with Madame Marquis, she shared a troubling linguistic interaction. During her first weeks in Mexico, she was stopped by a police officer for driving down a one-way street in the wrong direction. The 2 could barely communicate. However, Madame Marquis eventually resolved the situation using a pen and paper. Her story highlights the importance of resourcefulness the need to remain calm in stressful situations abroad. The energy on my Zoom calls was great, and I interviewed Joey and Antonin on the same day over Zoom.
Il est fort.
Salut!
As you can tell, we were having fun. Antonin shared a faux pas of his time in Kansas. One evening, his host father told him to call the rest of his host siblings to the dinner table. And Antonin told them, "It's time to diner." After no one understood him, he quickly learned that dinner was the proper word to use and laughed it off. His story shows that one can laugh and learn about linguistic faux pas. Similarly, Joey made a linguistic faux pas, except his was during the interview. At one point, I used the French verb tutoyer. He didn't quite understand the verb and used it incorrectly later in the interview. His faux pas sparked a brief discussion of the verb, and, best of all, I captured one of the conversations my podcast was modeled on. Once I'd recorded all of my interviews, I uploaded the audio files to a podcast editing software.
Bonjour et bienvenue à Faux pas français, un podcast qui comprend des interviews avec des gens qui ont vécu à l'étranger.
This is the intro to my podcast. In English, it means hello and welcome to Faux pas français, a podcast comprised of interviews with people who have lived abroad. I edit the recordings to flow smoothly. Here's an introduction of Ms. Brown Panagos.
Aujourd'hui, je parle avec Madame Adeline Brown Pinagos.
I used information from my interviews to record and insert guest introductions like this one. Finally, I created a complimentary opening and closing jingles for my episodes. Here's the opening one. With the audio complete, I focused on the transcription and publication of my podcast. Transcripts are critical because they allow French learners to better understand my podcast by reading along. I modeled my transcripts on those of a professional interview podcast. And seen below, my edited transcripts indicate who's speaking, and I added timestamps so listeners could skip to specific parts of the interview. I linked each of the transcripts as a Google Doc in the episode descriptions, as you can see here. Here is what an episode description for Faux pas français looks like. This is a screenshot of the website on Spotify. Next, I wrote a brief description of my podcast, and I wrote titles and summaries for each episode. I also took a light-hearted photo of myself in front of Ms. Michalski's poster to convey that my podcast is upbeat. The poster reads, "Il faut toujours avoir le courage d'être soi-même." In English, you must always have the courage to be yourself, complementing the message of my podcast. Finally, I published each episode. You can now listen to Faux pas français on Spotify today. Okay, donc, I thought about the phrase faux pas a lot while working on my podcast series. And Ms. Michalski suggested Faux pas français as the title of my podcast just last week. Now let me tell you how perfect a name it is. It had alliteration, faux français, hints at the language mishaps I discuss in each interview, and I have a personal history with the phrase. Until about 4 months ago, I had thought that faux pas was an abbreviation of the French phrase "il ne faut pas," roughly meaning "do not." When my dad, not my host dad, but my American father told me that faux pas actually means misstep in English, I was reminded that there's always more to learn in French. My own father, whose French level I had long surpassed, knew something I didn't. Furthermore, faux pas is a double entendre because it sounds like do not and misstep. Faux pas français is a reminder that learning to speak a foreign language is a rewarding journey that never ends, and people can and must feel empowered to start. Merci beaucoup.
And you can actually listen. It's on my phone right now. I've been running to it, actually. It's pretty great. Questions for Sacco?
how did you determine how long your podcasts were gonna be? So
Yeah.
like in length, what was your thought process there?
So I designed the questions to just kind of cultivate a conversation from which I would record a lot of audio. And like I said, I had 30 minutes of audio roughly for each interview. But then when I was editing it down, I was aiming for 5 minutes of podcast, but I realized that I had so much really good content from each interview that I ended up making them 10 minutes. So just kind of how it turned out.
Taco, one of the hardest things in the English language, if you are learning it for the first time, is idiomatic expressions, or are idiomatic expressions. So I wonder, did that come up in any of your research about French idioms that might be confused, or other idioms like in Italian, like a guest is like a fish after 3 days is an expression that you have to explain, or are there French idioms like that?
There are, but I focus more on French cognates and also or false cognates, and also just really whatever my interviewees decided to share. So it just happened to be less focused on idioms, but something cool to explore. Cool.
I'm curious what software you used for your podcast and if it did the transcription automatically.
Yes, it did. I didn't talk as much about the podcast as I wanted to just because of time constraints, or the podcast editing software, but I used a software called Riverside, and it did auto-generate the transcripts. However, there was lots of mistakes, especially making transcripts that were in French. And the way I uploaded the files, I had to manually type each speaker for the different parts of the podcast.
Was your friend and your host brother excited to be interviewed, or were they reluctant at first?
No, they were excited. I mean, we're pretty close. I'm pretty close with both of them, so they were like, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Are you gonna keep going?
Am I gonna keep going? I'm tempted to. I think if I do, it won't be until like after senior year is over. But I do love content creation online. I've made like YouTube videos in the past. So making a podcast was a really fun thing. Yeah, Joey knows balling with Saka.
Someone hand and someone
Oh.
has a question.
I was gonna say, like, how did you decide, like, who you would interview and how many people you would interview?
Once I decided to do the mirroring perspectives kind of dynamic and structure of my podcast, I wanted to do an even number of interviews. So for each interview, there could be an opposite interview. And then when we were discussing the scope of my project, initially I wanted to actually have 5 interviews, because we thought that would be an appropriate amount of work for the trimester-long course. But I ended up doing 4 because the amount of work required to record all 4 of them still fit the requirements for the course, and I also knew 4 people that I wanted to interview.
So we can come back to more questions at the end. Thank you again, Saka. Feel free to grab a snack or some coffee while we're setting up. We will just be a moment or two. Yes.
Or just one would be
And then
fine.
we have 2. I need plenty.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And our last presentation by Omar. You ready?
Imagine this. You're 10 years old, sitting in a doctor's office with your mom or dad. Suddenly, you're not just their child anymore. You're their voice. The doctor turns to you, and you're responsible for translating every word. You have to make sure that they understand everything about their health, and every decision depends on you. In that moment, you're no longer just a kid. You're the bridge between 2 worlds. That was me, and it's a reality for so many bilingual kids across America. In fact, an estimated 11 million Hispanic children in the U.S. regularly translate for their families, according to Campaign Live US. Growing up as a bilingual Mexican American, I faced this challenge often. Translating for my family, especially in high stakes medical situations, was one of the biggest responsibilities I took on. And today, I want to share how those experiences inspired me to create Niños. Hello everyone, my name is Omar Santoya, and today I'm here to talk about my scholars project. Something deeply personal and incredibly important to me. My project is called Niños Interpretando, Navegando Obstáculos en Salud. In English, it means children navigating obstacles in health. This is a website I created to support young interpreters who help their families navigate complex healthcare systems. It's a collection of resources aimed at bridging the language barrier in healthcare for Spanish-speaking families by helping bilingual children serve as a bridge. I still remember the first time I was in the doctor's office. I had to translate in the doctor's office. I was in 5th grade, and my aunt needed help with her medical appointment. She didn't speak any English, so it was up to me to make sure she understood what the doctor was saying. I can still feel the nervousness in my stomach that day. The responsibility felt so heavy, like the weight just wasn't strong enough for. I was just a kid, but in that moment, I was responsible for helping my aunt understand her health, something way more important than my math test or my spelling bee the next step. The doctor used words I didn't fully understand, medical terms that no 5th grader should be able to know. But I did my best to translate, trying to capture the meaning, even if I didn't know every word. But I did my best to translate, trying to capture the meaning even if I didn't know every word. The experience opened my eyes to the challenges my family and so many others face, just because they don't speak the language. It's about feeling safe, being understood, and making informed decisions. As I got older and I started taking Williston Scholars this trimester, I started to realize just how many kids like me had the same experience. For bilingual children, it's not unusual to take on the role of interpreters for family members in hospitals, clinics, and doctor's offices. And these aren't just simple conversations. We're talking about high-stakes situations where one wrong translation or one misword could have serious consequences. And according to a study, 40% of children in bilingual households have acted as interpreters in healthcare settings, according to George Washington University Hubble Farm Health Sciences Library. Language barriers make it incredibly hard for families to feel safe and understood in healthcare. It creates a gap, a disconnect, and children, often as young as 10, are expected to bridge that gap. They're given a huge responsibility, often with no guidance or support. And this shared experience among so many bilingual kids has made me realize that there has to be a better way. And that's when the idea for Niños began. At first, I thought about creating a basic paper guide to help kids like me feel less overwhelmed, and I wanted to include the basics, medical terms in Spanish, common phrases, and maybe some tips on how to translate effectively. But as I kept working on it, I realized that this could be something more. The idea grew, and eventually Niños evolved into a comprehensive collection of research healthcare tools and resources. I wanted to create something that would give young interpreters the tools, resources, and confidence to support their families effectively. Niños isn't just a guide anymore. It's a complete resource tailored specifically for young interpreters, and it's about giving them a solid foundation so they're not thrown into this role unprepared. As I developed Niños, I wanted to create an online resource that young interpreters could access anytime. So I built the Niños website on Google Sites, and it became the central collection of healthcare language and support tools. One unique aspect of the website was its focus on 3 specific Spanish dialects: Honduran, Mexican, and Puerto Rican Spanish. Each of these dialects has distinct terminology and expressions, and I wanted to make sure that the resources on Niños could be useful for families from these backgrounds. To achieve this, I created lists of words and phrases in each dialect, divided into key categories, which were diseases and conditions, diseases and resources, healthcare resources, and caregiver terms. Additionally, I found a website called naturalreaders.com where I could copy and paste terms and to hear them pronounced in each of the 3 accents. This helped me ensure that the terms sounded naturally and familiar to speakers of each dialect. And my goal in the website was to make it culturally relevant and a practical tool for kids who find themselves in these interpreting roles. Now, let's talk about how to actually use the Niños website. Here's a quick guide. So, as you can see right here, this is the homepage from our website. And to start it off, you click on any of the 3 flags you see: Honduras, Mexico, and Puerto Rico. Simply click on the flag for the country you want to see, and it'll take you to a page with resources specific to that dialect. And once you get there, an example I have is the Mexican slide, where you'll see 4 different pages. You'll see diseases and conditions, and this section provides a list of common diseases, symptoms, and medical terms with easy to understand explanations to help young interpreters convey health information accurately. Diseases and resources, a guide for healthcare facilities, treatments, and preventative resources that families may need, like urgent care, screenings, or insulin injections. Healthcare resources, vocabulary for healthcare personnel, equipment, and processes, covering everything from doctors to x-ray machines, so interpreters know who and what's involved in healthcare visits. Caregiver terms, phrases or vocabulary for at-home care, such as take with food or apply daily to help explain caregiving rules and tasks clearly. And 3, at the bottom of each page is the link to naturalreaders.com for pronunciation. If you're unsure how a term should sound, copy it into naturalreaders.com, which lets you hear the pronunciation in each of the 3 accents. This feature helps make sure that you're using language that feels natural and familiar to the people you're interpreting for. And my goal was to make the site intuitive and accessible for young interpreters who need quick, accurate information in real-time healthcare settings. To build Niños, I needed to understand the communities I wanted to serve. I started by researching the most common Latino groups in Western Massachusetts where I live. And I found that Puerto Rican, Mexican, and Honduran communities make up a large part of the Hispanic population here. From there, I looked into specific health issues that these communities face. I learned about conditions like diabetes, high blood pressure, and asthma that affect these groups at higher rates. This research helped shape the resources I created for Niños: Spanish medical terms, explanations of common health issues, and practical guides that kids could actually use when interpreting medical settings. I wanted these resources to be straightforward, culturally relevant, and specific to the needs of Hispanic families. Niños is more than just about words. It's a support system for young interpreters who, like me, take on the responsibility out of love and necessity. It's about empowering kids so they don't feel overwhelmed by the weight of this role. Through Niños, I want young interpreters to feel capable and prepared so they can help their families without feeling like they're carrying this burden alone. I know what it feels like to be that kid in the doctor's office, feeling like the whole world is on your shoulders. With Niños, my hope is that kids in that position can feel empowered, confident, and supported. My ultimate goal with Niños is to help bridge the language barrier in healthcare for bilingual families like mine. I believe language shouldn't come in the way of understanding safety or comfort when it comes to health. Looking forward, I hope to expand Niños to reach even more young interpreters. There are countless kids across the country facing the same challenge, and I want them to have the tools and support they need to confidently assist their families. Niños is more than just a project for me. It's a movement to bridge the cultural and language gaps that separate so many families from the care they deserve. So, one thing I think you guys can notice that all slides have in common is pictures of my family. And I want to take a moment to tell about why language matters to me so much personally. For me, language isn't just about words. It's intertwined with family. It's the way I connect with everyone in my family. It's how I connect with my parents, my aunts and uncles, my cousins, and all the people who make up my world. In my family, language is a way of showing love, of feeling close to each other, and sharing our traditions and stories. When I had to interpret in healthcare settings, it felt more than just translating words. I was translating our family's hopes, their fears, and sometimes our confusion. I knew that my family needed to feel safe and understood in these situations, and that feeling of safety comes from understanding. And that's why creating Niños became so important to me. I wanted to give other kids who feel the same connection to their families through language, I wanted to give them tools to bridge those gaps and make sure that their families feel the love and understanding that language brings. Niños isn't just a project for me. It's a way of strengthening these ties between language, family, and understanding. These are ways you can help spread the awareness about kids who act as translators. And thank you so much for listening. I hope my story and my work behind Niños has inspired you to think about how small actions can create positive change in our communities. This is a QR code to my website, so if you guys want to take your phones out and scan it, guys can look around.
shared? Are you envisioning, working through a hospital system? Where do you sort of take it from here?
So from here, I wanted to start in like smaller clinics in Holyoke, Springfield, places with high amounts of Latino population. So I think I could just put the QR code at any clinic, just put a little poster, have people scan it on their phones, and whenever it's needed, it'll always just be there. People can just go on the website, just look up what they need. Luke.
What are the differences between the three languages that we have up there?
So each of the dialects, there's a lot of similarities because overall Spanish is similar almost everywhere you go, but in different countries there are different words for different things. So some diseases have different names in each of the dialects, but overall they're pretty similar. Hazel.
Have you had someone in your family test out the website? And if so, how did it go?
Can you repeat that?
Have you had anyone in your family test out the website? And if so, how did it go?
I have not. I've shown my parents, obviously, my website, but I haven't had it used in actual medical settings.
So this was a really multidisciplinary project. So you've got medical in there, you've got language, you've got technology. So where does this take you? What are you inspired to do with college or career as a result of this?
I mean, I think I want to use this. I want to keep updating it. Eventually, maybe I want to put more dialects in it, so not just the three. And I mean, I think I'll keep working on it, keep adding it wherever I go. End up college, I can keep working on that even after that.
So do you think this website would help you a lot as a child when you were trying to attend?
I think it would have helped me a lot. It would have given me words to know. I mean, as a 10-year-old, I was expected to know everything the doctor was saying. Obviously, that wasn't the case, because as a 10-year-old, you're just not aware of those things. So I think my website would have helped me a lot.
Any questions for any of our scholars? At the class, the process? If not, then one last round of applause for excellence. And please enjoy snacks, and then if you're here with a class, check in with your teacher before you head off. Thank you all so much for coming.